This thing was buried like somebody had set it aside up against the wall in our dirt barn, and over the years, dirt had gotten pushed up against it. It wasn't the one that was at his gravesite, but every 50 years or so, the federal government allows for VA stones to be replaced. You can apply and get them replaced. This is a picture of James Bethel Gresham. That's the headstone once we got it out of the dirt. And what we had here, if you go to the library or the museum today, we donated it to the museum through the Board of Public Works. There's actually 3 headstones that have been at his gravesite. The original one is in the DAV room at the Coliseum. And this is the article from 1978 that talks a little bit about that. The second one was replaced with the most recent one. So one of my predecessors, when they did the replacement with the one that you see now, must have pulled that aside and never told anybody about it. And through administrations and change, people forget the history. Until I found it, I went to the Works Board, and the Works Board donated it back to the museum. And that's where you can see it today in its present display down there with James Bethel Gresham. Here's some pictures from Gresham's gravesite before the headstone was there. This is when they brought him back from Europe, I believe in 1921, with all the dignitaries and such. This is a picture that I took during a foggy morning, I think it was earlier this year. Kind of reminded me of this morning if you were out early. Here's another picture I took with a cell phone. I was out there of the veterans section and just thought I would include it because it's a nice picture with the sun and the flag. Oak Hill Cemetery and Locust Hill Cemetery today. Actually, you can still see the Boone Funeral Home has the horse-drawn hearse that was built in 1853, so it's as old as Oak Hill Cemetery. We actually still have services that show up with the horse-drawn hearse. We also have this show up from time to time. This is actually called The Last Ride. It's a Harley hearse. And unfortunately, usually it's either a Harley enthusiast or somebody that might have passed away in a motorcycle accident is usually when you see one of the funeral homes bring this out. But this thing right here, it's the only time I've seen people get out of their cars, and before the procession goes in, they're all sitting there taking pictures with the Harley. And I'm just like, I'm amazed because people turn into fans. And, people mourn in different ways. We've even had weddings at the cemetery. That's a setup of a wedding. This is from about 3 or 4 weeks ago when the hearse was out at a veteran gravesite. And they bring the horses, and we try to get them water, and it's a big to-do. They'll give you that hearse for free. You just have to pay for the tending and the horses. So it doesn't cost any more than having a normal hearse. You just have to pay for the horses themselves, and so it's really not that expensive. This is our modern day Veterans Plaza. If you remember when I talked about the statue that had collapsed a few minutes ago, this is where it would have been, up there in our Veterans Plaza. The city did this in 2001. This is looking from the Veterans Plaza towards the office today. Notice these 2 trees, how much bigger they are in the older pictures where they were very small. The residence would have been right here to the west. Some of the things we try to do is we try to innovate. We have website upgrades, we're on social media. One of the things you're going to see in the next few months is our Ponum software and our Cemetery 360. This is a GIS map with Ponum to where you're going to be able to go to our database and go right to the grave site. And you'll be able to have the coordinates on your phone that'll help you get there in the cemetery. And that's my family lot that I have right there. And that's one of the things I like to tell, it's an interesting story. My office is right here. And I can see my family lot from my office. So that kind of keeps it in perspective every day when you can actually see your final resting place from the confines of the office. But this should go live hopefully by the end of the year. It's going to be a work in progress because we have to load a lot of data. And with over 70,000 interments, you can only imagine. Now, if you go to our website right now, you can see the 360 views of the cemetery. It's like Google Earth, but within the cemetery itself. We also have the SimLS software, which is a selling software where graves are listed like you would see a house listing. We had the ARBNet accreditation in 2017 for both city cemeteries. Oak Hill is actually a level 2 and Locust Hill is a level 1. Level 4 is the highest you can get. When you start getting up to level 3, you have to have dedicated staff for the arboretum. Level 1 has over 25 different varieties of trees. Level 2 has over 100. We've got about 150 varieties of trees at Oak Hill and just about, I think it's right around 37 at Locust Hill, and we're doing some plantings this fall that should up those numbers as well. At Oak Hill, we named it after William Brooks, and he's actually the 3rd superintendent of Oak Hill Cemetery. We've had all sorts of volunteers that have helped us with the projects. One tree of every species has a tag on it that you can scan and get some QR code information on, and there's eventually going to be a walking tour just for trees as well. We're also trying to stay up on the cremation front. This is our new cremation lakefront niches. They run about $1,095. That's the only thing I'm going to talk about sales tonight. Inside, we've also done the internal cremation niches at Locust Hill Cemetery, because a lot of people don't realize in the next 30 years, cremation rate's going to be above 95%. Just in the past 5 years, it's gone up immensely in Evansville. It's right around 50% up in Indy. We're probably in the upper 30s, because you know Evansville is always a little bit behind the times, but it's just in the past 2 years, I've probably done more cremation services in the past 2 years than I did the previous 5. So we've got to stay ahead of the competition and have these offerings, because this is what the public wants. How many have seen the solar farm? That was my baby. We used to farm that land for about $3,500 a year. And it was a pain in the you-know-what to maintain that whole stretch of land. So now we're just farming the sun in partnership with Vectren, and we get a land lease that's several $1,000s more, it's 7 times more than what we used to get off farming. And all that money goes back into the perpetual fund for the cemetery. It doesn't go downtown, it stays with the cemetery. So that's a big win for the cemetery, and it's a 30 or 40-year lease. It's 25 years with 3 5-year renewals, and you'll be like, Chris, why is there a 40-year lease? How many know what the average life of a solar panel is? 40 years. So we're going to be in the sun farming business long past any of our times here, but there's still 30 acres when you subtract the 16 that are in the solar farm project, still 30 acres for future cemetery development. If you remember on that first slide where I said the developed areas are 125 acres, and we've got 71,000 roughly people over that 125 acres, and you know cremation rates are going to go above 95% in the next 30 years. If I take 3 acres of that undeveloped land and plant it just for cremation only, I can put 80,000 people on 3 acres. So we've got plenty of cemetery. We've probably got conservatively 350 years of cemetery if cremation rates do what they're going to do. Because everybody's always like, Chris, you're going to run out of land. I'm like, no, we're not. Having an undeveloped land in the cemetery business is just like having gold in Fort Knox. We're going to be in the cemetery business for an awful long time. Some of the events we do, the Butterfly to Remember, obviously all the events were canceled this year because of COVID, but we partner with the Zeracare Hospice, and it's open to the public, and we do a butterfly release. How many have heard about the Adopt an Ash program with the Emerald Ash Borer? We've got 23 ash trees at Oak Hill, and you can actually go and adopt an ash tree online if you go to the website and pay for the treatment to save the ash trees. That's a whole nother talk. I can get an hour on that. This is our Twilight Tour with the reenactors. There's John West, I think one of your members. It would have been this weekend, but COVID took that away. We also have Halloween at the cemetery, and we've actually had food trucks in the cemetery with this. Everybody's like, well, why the Spirit Medical Fund? Well, the Spirit Medical Fund was founded after a dog was found burnt and left for dead at Oak Hill Cemetery back around the year 2000. They named her Spirit. They raised more money than she could handle for her care. So now there's a fund that's managed by animal control that makes an animal that comes in that has an immediate medical need that might need help to get to a level of adoptability. So because of the relationship with the event that happened at the cemetery, we wanted to do something for the public. And actually, when I do my walking tour where people can take their dogs, that's usually the best attended walking tour of the year. We're also a Veterans Day regional site with the VA. Veterans Day services are at 11 a.m. at Locust Hill, 1 p.m. at Oak Hill. As of right now, they're still on. There's going to be social distancing. They're outside. If it rains, we're going to have to limit the numbers on who goes in the chapel. But as of right now, they're still on. We also have the Wreaths Across America coming up that's still on December 19th. You can go online right now and sponsor a wreath for $15, and it goes on a veteran's gravesite. You have up until November 30th for that. These are some of the wreaths that you'll see for that project. Now, who's ready? Were there any questions on the cemetery history? Okay, now we better turn the cameras off because we're going to have the unfiltered stories. Now, these are the stories and the pictures that I've taken. I've been in my job for 12 years. And you know what time of year it is. It's October. Everybody says, ooh, the cemetery's haunted. Well, I've got some proof, some pictures here that I'll share with you, and I'll let them speak for themselves. Here's some pictures of don't go in the cemetery after dark. It's from sun up to sundown. So I'm not encouraging anybody to go in after dark. This is a picture right at dark that Liz Ertl took of the cemetery to give you some views. This is an interesting story. I'm not going to say the name. I get a call one day. There's a palm tree back in section 39. And I'm like, guys, I'm not in the mood. They're like, no, you need to get back here. Somebody planted a palm tree. This was on a Monday morning. Somebody over the weekend planted a palm tree. Now what they neglected is the burial in this section is to the east of the stone. So they should have gone up front with it to stay on their spot. What they neglected to realize is there's two burial vaults right here that were unmarked with a headstone. So they dug that and put it on somebody's gravesite. We allowed them to come back and get their tree. My boss made me allow them to come and get it. I was going to run it through the chipper and let them come get the chip in, but I was overruled. And but that's an interesting. That's going in the book one day. We also have wild turkeys at the cemetery. How many people have seen wild turkeys in the city limits? This is at Locust Hill. I've been unable to get a good picture of the one at Oak Hill, but there's more at Oak Hill than there ever have been at Locust Hill. We also have deer in the city cemeteries. And trust me, when the water comes up in the spring around the river and the creek, it pushes them into the cemetery. We also have coyotes sometimes in the cemetery. We haven't had any recently. The most recent infestation we took care of. There weren't, everybody sees them in the cemetery. They think they were denned in the cemetery. They weren't denned on our land, so it was kind of hard to mitigate the problem. They were just coming through the cemetery to eat, but they were denned up off our property, so we had to work with the property owner to help them ID their problem, because it wasn't just affecting the cemetery, it was affecting other parts of the east side of Evansville. We've had people, and this was a sad story, I get a picture from somebody that they had dumped a lizard in the cemetery, and I had actually called the Tri-State Herpetological Society. And I had no idea what the Herpetological Society was until I had to make that call. But if you notice the dark color underneath the animal, that's a sign of stress in the animal. So I spent 2 weeks trying to locate this animal early in the morning and late at night. And unfortunately, we were never able to, somebody had dumped it. They just couldn't handle it, and they dumped it in the cemetery. And I really wish we could have found it, but I'm hoping it ended up all right. It's another picture of the drone. The reason I show this picture, notice the house in the distance across Buena Vista. All right. You guys ready? You sitting down? That's what I was greeted to for a holiday light display a few years ago that made the internet rounds, right outside the veterans area. And the lights would move down to the toilet. And Fast forward a couple years, a guy comes up, because we run both cemeteries out of Oak Hill. So he come out and he wanted to buy some spots at Locust Hill Cemetery. We're in the process of finalizing the deal at the counter, and I had to get his address. And he gave me the address on Buena Vista, and I'm like, wait a minute. Your house is across the street from the cemetery, from the veterans area, right? He goes, yeah. I said, hold on a second, I got something for you. So I went in my computer, pulled the picture out, printed it, and I said, can you tell me what the hell was going on with this right here? And he kind of got all, he goes, I have to tell you, I was in the hospital for 3 weeks and couldn't move, and my buddies did that as a joke. And I didn't know it was like that. And he kind of got really, like, he didn't realize, you know, he was embarrassed. And I said, well, I'm not mad now that I know the story, but try selling somebody a grave or somebody dealing with grief and loss across the street, and they see Santa Claus on top of your house relieving himself. I mean, I can't make that up. How many remember Pokemon Go? Well, I caught them all at the cemetery. I came in, it was a Sunday night, I get a call, hey, you guys are on Evansville watch, there's 1,000 people out at the cemetery. I go in the gates about 10:30 at night, and it looked like Holiday World. I mean, there were cars everywhere. They were driving through sections. And this was right when it was starting to become a problem, not just with our cemetery, but with other cemeteries. So with me having all the ties to the international group, I called our legal department, and I said, look, I don't want to get in front of what Arlington's going to do about it, but I want to be second in line to kind of handle it, because they don't need to be playing games in the cemetery. Because we were having people, we were trying to lead a service in, and they'd be on their phones in their cars playing lazily, and they wouldn't yield to the cemetery service, just being disrespectful. Well, through the legal contact with the International Cemetery Association, we were able to get the point of contact with the people that put the game out, and we got the city attorneys involved. And they sent me an email on a Saturday morning that at noon, it was going to be shut, you know, they were going to remove the sites from both city cemeteries. I was working that Saturday, and I'm sitting up there it was about 12:30, I was waiting for a service. And I never took much satisfaction in the fact that, but it was this day where I saw a guy, a grown person, that was old enough to be, he didn't need to be playing Pokemon Go. He was older than I was. He drove in, hit his brakes, and you could see him pick up his phone, and he's not very happy, but he couldn't figure out why the Pokemon, and he rolled up and he goes, what's going on? I said, oh, I caught them all. I caught all of them. But I was the bad guy that ended Pokemon Go in the city cemeteries. Oh, and then people were like, well, is the cemetery haunted? This is a Super Bowl story, because on Super Bowl, that February 4th, 2013 is the Monday morning after the Super Bowl. And I happened to be at my river camp that night because I watched the Super Bowl. I get a call about 2 in the morning that, hey, the law enforcement's out at your office. They recorded somebody in your office, and they've got a manhunt going on at Oak Hill Cemetery. So we go on. The police are all tearing through with the dogs, and they can't find any hits. We go in the office. Nothing's been touched. The alarm's still set. They go and play back the recording that the Sonatro, our provider, picked up, and I wish I had it. But it sounded kind of muffled of a man and woman having a conversation in the cemetery, or in the office at 1:38. The only thing I have of proof is this is the police run card of the incident to prove that it actually happened. I've never seen so many police officers say, Chris, this is your domain, we're done, and we're out of here. But when they heard that video, that tape that was played back over speakerphone, it sounded like a man and woman having a conversation. You couldn't make out what exactly they were saying, but you could hear what sounded like a man and a woman, and I'm the witness to that. But I always get asked that. I don't know if this video is going to play, but here's another story that I'll let do the talking.
My name's Tim Rakestraw, and one afternoon around 11:30, Chris and I was over here in a section looking at some work that needed to be done, and we had both just looked at the same area at the same time, and woof, this green smoke, mist-looking thing just arose up from the ground, and then it kind of just dissipated off in the air. It kind of gave me some chills, and I looked at Chris, and we just both
That's Tim Rakestraw, who owns Rakestraw Monuments. And I wish I had a picture, because this was about 11:30 in the morning of that day back in 2016. Let me get my mics settled back on here. But as the smoke was coming, I was going like this, trying to get a picture of it with my phone. We originally thought something was on fire on the other side of the wall. And I'm like, look at that. And this green smoke about yay high comes through the cemetery. And I know I'm not crazy, because we've had a couple reports recently of somebody seeing something similar to that in the same area of the cemetery. And the ladies in the office go, hey Chris, that's your and Tim's area. But Tim's been working in cemeteries for 45 years, and he's never seen anything like that. So I wanted, it's me telling you the story is one thing. When I got the other guy standing next to me that sells monuments that saw the same thing, I'll let that be the judge of that. This is probably one of the most definitive funny stories that I've gotten, but this is the proof where you start seeing some of the pictures. I had somebody show up with this picture here. They came from Western Kentucky. They were amateur ghost hunters. And they show up months after the fact, after they were in our cemetery, obviously after dark, and they're like, we found this image on our film when we got back home. They were from Hopkinsville, Kentucky, so they drove a few ways. They're like, but we can't remember where in the cemetery we were. They showed me the picture. The ladies at the desk were like, oh, there's only one person that would be able to tell you where that is in the cemetery. I looked at the picture and I said, I know exactly where that's at, because that green vine has really upset me for years. I haven't been able to get it under control on that tree, so I knew exactly where that tree was. We took them out to the section, and you can kind of see I blew it up there to where you could see, how many see like a small child, turn of the century type clothing? This is a section in daylight of what that looks like. So I take them back there, and they get out of their car and take a few pictures, and they're hopping back in. I'm like, wait a minute. You drove all the way from Hopkinsville, Kentucky, and you're not even going to get 5 foot into the section? I said, I'll bet all the money in my wallet right now when we go out there that there's kids' graves somewhere around that picture. She's like, oh, I didn't even think of that. And I'm like, oh, I got $20 if you want to bet. I said, I guarantee you where that image was, there are some kids. Sure enough, we walk out into that section, and there wasn't just one, there were 4 in a row. All from that, you can see the dates of 1902, 1901, and I think the other one was 1903, or 1889 on the one. But that kind of, if you go back and look at that picture, you see that in imagery. This isn't something I produced, but it really, I told you we're going to get the unfiltered part of the stories at the end. This is what people like around this time of year. These are some more pictures that Liz Ertl took of some orbs in the cemetery. These 2 shots are seconds apart on her, how when you take a bunch of shots, and you can see the orb in broad daylight in section G at Oak Hill Cemetery. There's some more. If you notice, picture 1 and picture 2, you're looking right there. You can see the orb moving across the ground. And then, how many people love Evansville Watch? You ever see Evansville Watch? Somebody posted this one time on Evansville Watch that apparently we had a heck of a party going on, and I like to kind of put that towards the end. And I know where the rainbow ends. It ends behind our office, because that's a shot of the rainbow coming down into the pond that I took with a camera phone. I'm right at about 7:30. I could go on for hours, but I wanted to kind of get a lot of information to you within about an hour, hour and a half. Were there any questions? I know I've hit up a lot of different, from the history to some of the scary story type stuff. Any questions?
How do you know if your ancestors had a tombstone at one time but it's not there anymore, and you know where they're buried?
I use the map. It depends on how old they are. If there's a vault, we can go out and probe the vault. We can get the measurements and show you exactly where it's at. Or sometimes if there's a flat marker on a hillside, oftentimes the flat marker will sink below the ground and we'll probe and try to see if there was at one point a marker. I've had several that have been buried, you know, anywhere from 6 to 8 inches in the ground, because over time, people don't realize the ground does shift. When you're going back to on any given day, my problems go back to 1853. And you could be on a hillside and things will shift over time, ever so slightly, but when you think over 100 years, stuff will shift. But we would get with our maps that we have and the data that we have, and we go out and measure and make the best estimate that we can within the records. I'm only as good as what was left me. And sometimes at Locust Hill, I'll admit it's a challenge, because there was a fire at Locust Hill in its past where a lot of the public areas, the records for the public sections, which is where the indigent were buried, are non-existent. I might have names and burial dates, but I don't have locations. And I don't really have good maps, but that's just one section at Locust Hill. If we're talking Oak Hill, odds are I can find them, unless they're a Confederate soldier. That's one of the great mysteries that I haven't yet to figure out. Was there another question? Oh, ask. Yes, ma'am, back there.
There something in the contract when someone thought that they were talking to a person where really it was a haunting?
So did somebody thought they were talking to a haunt? Not that's been reported to me. The most things that I've ever had experiences with personally, and I don't want you all calling the mayor's office tomorrow saying, oh, you got a crazy man out there running the cemeteries. But I've seen the green mist on multiple occasions, and believe it or not, in daylight more than ever. If you remember, the first generation of camera phones were flip phones. I had a picture. I used to take pictures with my flip phone as notes for like work orders and stuff. And I had a picture that you could make out a person kind of waving, but I could never, the phone died and I could never get the picture off. But usually when you go to a party and people are like, where do you work? You tell them I always say I work for government, because I don't want to say I work for the cemetery, because a lot of times people are creeped out by it and they don't want to talk to you. But people would ask me, have you ever seen anything? I'd flip out that flip phone and show them the picture. And you know, you couldn't edit the pictures on a flip phone, and they wouldn't ask another question. But as far as personal contact, I've ran into some amateur ghost hunters that we've had to ask to leave before, that have had the equipment that you would see here when they do the, the Gray Lady Days, or where they have the ghost hunters come here. Because we try to frown upon that, you know, at the cemetery, but I've never really had any personal conversations. But I have seen orbs in the office. It was never a negative feeling. It was a positive feeling. And I have heard voices in the basement one time at night. It sounded like a card party going on of a bunch of men. And needless to say, I set the alarm and I got out of there, because I was a little worried. And I remember talking to some of my predecessors. I'm like, man, did you ever have any, this was early on in my tenure, I'm like, you guys have all been out here at night. Have you ever had any experiences? And they're like, well, what'd you hear? And I said, well, it sounded like a damn card party going on in the basement. And from what I'm told, back in the day, they used to have like a card party that went on in the basement, because it was so secluded, nobody would come and look at it. And some of the elected officials and stuff would play cards out there. And you'll come into the office some days and it'll smell like pipe smoke. And you'll hit that hint, and there's no smoking. Nobody smokes in the office now. But from what I'm told, one of my predecessors used to sit where I sit and would smoke on his pipe. But and if anybody's been around like tobacco smoke from a pipe, it's very distinctive. And it's not the special blend, it's the, it's the traditional stuff, like the cherry blend type tobacco. And that's a very, very unique thing. But I wish I had a better answer for you. I'm sure there's somebody out there that might have had an experience. But me personally, usually it's all positive. And when I do dig down, like when I see the mist or if I see an orb, I try to look at the area around it and look at the headstones and dig into what those people were encountered. 9 times out of 10, I'll either find children that had died, or I'll find somebody that died like in an auto accident or murdered or some sort of unsettling way. 9 times out of 10, I'll find a headstone like that within about 5 to 10 foot of where I saw the orb. That's a true story. Yes, ma'am.
Is it okay to park at the cemetery and eat your lunch?
Yeah.
That's something I've been doing for a long time.
Yeah. You probably see me drive around. Park at the cemetery, eat your lunch. We want people, we have walkers that are regular. That's perfectly fine. It's hard. Okay. If I write a book one day, everybody thinks I run people out of there at night. The magic hour where all the foolishness happens is around lunchtime from like 11 to 1. And, you know, running grown adults out of a cemetery at that time of day, it's, you know, our proximity to Fairs Avenue and some of the traditional stuff that you might hear of going on there. I've had to run out some of the prostitutes, but I did it early on in my tenure to where now they know not to even try. First couple of years was fun. I had to really roll up my sleeves and clean things up. But there's some areas even at Locust Hill where you can get back on the other side of the hill and they can't see you from Kratzville or Buena Vista. There's about 3 or 4 spots between the two cemeteries. When I drive through at night, I always hit, usually, if it's nice out, I'll run somebody out. We'll have extra patrols this time of year, with there being 2 full moons in the month of October, and the second of which is on Halloween. We used to have paid security that night, but with budgets where they're at, we can't do that anymore. But I've befriended a lot of the shift officers that they'll do their reports in the cemeteries on second and third shift, so just having that deterrent there. Plus we've gone through and trimmed up our trees and done a lot of SEPTED type stuff, which is community environment policing, to where we try to make sure our lights work. We cut back some of the bushes to create do away with blind spots and kind of make it more open, to where you do little things like that. It subtly deters people from doing foolishness, but people are going to be people. You know, when I think that I've seen it all, I know I could leave here tonight and you know, it's like I got a call at 3 in the morning about a month ago out at Locust Hill, and they had a police chase or sheriff chase with 3 guys got out of the car. The van ended up being about that far from hitting the Chapel of Eternal Peace, and what was about a $500 problem with the cemetery, or about a $3,000 problem where they destroyed our fence, could have been much more. And when that phone rings at 3 in the morning, I mean, I'm like, oh man, here we go. I got to get that book ready because I'm going to write that other chapter. I even have a Valentine's Day story. You talk about running people out, and I'll try to tell this as, you know, I know there might be some ears watching. I did not purposely call in because I knew with Evansville Watch and me calling in what I saw going over the air on Valentine's Day would have made we would have made national news. And so it was